We're getting briefing. It's nice to be.
You be wherever you want to be.
Kia ora tātou, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei rā, te taite, te rā ruatika marima o tēnei marama hune, nei te mea atu kia koutou. Just a public announcement, hopefully Giles has his phone turned off today. Kia ora Giles, thank you for that. I'm looking forward to the cake.
He's shouting. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the cake at the next S&P committee meeting. Tēnā koe Giles, thank you. And commiserations for 0-0 as well. Back to the kaupapa for today. We're looking at the strategic direction and LTP approach. I'll call up Amy, Emma, Cecilia, Carmen and Pip to the table, please. Kia ora, Amy. I'll hand over to you.
Morena tātou. I'll just hand over directly to Emma and looking forward to the session. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So the purpose of this session is to bring back to you the development of the strategic direction. We've had a number of workshops and discussions on this now and are getting to its final form. So it was 2 weeks ago that we shared with you the first version. And so today's to present back how we've incorporated that feedback and present you with an initial sort of look and feel of how it's shaping up. So, yes, we had those 2 workshops on the 13th and the 28th, and they were quite comprehensive and in-depth in terms of looking at what the strategic direction looks like for setting the future for both the LTP and future decision-making, particularly in this period of transition. Just in terms of context, and this is really just to sort of make the point that things are changing, as we say, on a weekly and daily basis. So this is being updated every day. Major announcement today that was the committee report, the planning bills, which we were expecting to be announced this week, will now be is being delayed till July, and looking around sort of late July before we see that. And there's also been the Emergency Management Bill Select Committee report, and you'll be getting a briefing on that later today. And the Local Government Systems Improvement Bill continues to move through and had its second reading this week. So I think that's just really to highlight the context that things are continuously changing. And so in terms of thinking of the strategic direction, thinking about how it frames up for that period of transition. I'll hand over to Cecilia just for a quick recap, and then we'll present the version 2 and ask for your feedback on that.
Thanks, Emma. So, yeah, this slide just sort of shows the picture of how we've got to this point today in terms of the building blocks of developing the strategic direction, but also acknowledging that these 3 dedicated workshops haven't been in isolation, and that, you know, from the beginning through induction, we've heard councillors as well as you've been responding to the changing context. Particularly at the last workshop we had on the 11th of June, there was overall comfort with the draft strategic direction as presented, and that it had reflected the workshop outputs to date. But some further clarity and refinement was sought. This was particularly around being clear on what council was responsible for, further refining the principles to make them more succinct, and also just ensuring there was no unintended consequences from the way that the priorities were drafted. This was particularly relating to the data priority, but also noting the need to have consistent understanding of definitions. Now, I'll just quickly skip over this slide. just to mention the slider that's in the pack before you today. I won't read through it in detail, but yeah, just wanted to bring this slide to you just to demonstrate how we've taken on board those outputs of the workshop and considered your intentions expressed at those workshops and how they've led to the defining of the priorities that come into the strategic direction, just to demonstrate how these actually might be applied in practice as you work through your decision-making engagement in the LTP and through reform and transition. So now we'll turn to back to the... Yep.
On the one before, the slide before, can you just flesh out for me what you mean by unintended consequences of expectations from the priorities? Just a little.
That was particularly around the Chair's question about the way that the data priority was drafted, and that it wasn't, we weren't intending to do big new investment projects or further complicate things when we're trying to get ready for reform. So yeah, that was mostly around that one.
Kia ora, councillors. We'll just hold off questions until we finish this part of the presentation. Kia ora.
Well, we are almost there anyway, so ready for discussion. So I'll just pass over Emma, and we'll just make a couple of comments about how the feedback's been reflected in the strategic direction in front of us today.
So this is what the version 2 looks like, and we've just made a few changes to what we presented 2 weeks ago. One of the things that we particularly, that came through strongly was the visibility of that this is a strategic direction for Environment Canterbury, and where that we incorporate the emphasis on the sort of environmental focus. So there was some feedback around that, and there was a discussion about whether we would make some changes to the vision and purpose. We have kept the vision and purpose as it currently exists, but we have made changes, and we think that pulling it all together, where we're sort of describing the core service delivery model and the strategic priorities, that talks to the focus on the environment, but also on economic prosperity and the sort of the broad roles and responsibilities of the regional council. In terms of the vision and the purpose, we had a look at some other councils and some other examples, often that they're not sort of expressly, because the point was made that you may not necessarily know that this was Environment Canterbury, but also the vision and purpose is really intended to sort of create that visionary aspiration. And so, look, we think we're proposing that collectively together it brings through the environmental aspect strongly enough, and the vision and purpose, it's been really sort of resonates with people, and I think to make changes and sort of start wordsmithing that would not be our advice, but to focus on the strategic priorities, which was sort of the direction that we've approached this with. But that's our, just to provide a bit of context. So we gave it consideration, but we haven't made any changes, but we think that it is reflected in the overall picture.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple more comments on the strategic direction. So obviously the first change you'll see is the sort of look and feel of it, but also just noting that the design will be further refined as we adapt it for different online platforms and documents. And the third priority, so just picking up on the question before, so we've changed to the third priority just to be a bit more clear that it's about supporting readiness for reform and having sort of coherent and accessible data and services. And then with the guiding principles made more succinct, dropped one out, which was adaptive and agile, because just felt that that came across in the other aspects of the strategic direction. And that is the main changes we've made from the 11th of June. So I'll open up. Yeah. Chair.
Kia ora, I'll just go to co-chairs of Strategy and Policy first. Megan or Nettles?
I'm still framing my questions at the moment.
Okay.
But what my original response to this is, I really like the look of this. Yeah. This looks like us, and it's really simple. And I feel like staff really did listen to the feedback about simplify, really make it something that we can really easily understand. In particular, look, I agree about the vision and purpose to stay the same. I think that's good advice from staff, and we've pulled in all of the discussion about environmental in other ways. In fact, I think the strategic priorities are pretty focused on environmental more than they are everything else, which is good because the priority should actually cover everything, and they do speak to that. When I looked at guiding principles and then the values, I was trying to kind of, in my mind, go, well, what's the difference here? And for me, if I understand it correctly, the guiding principles are like, how do we make decisions? And what do we need to consider when we make decisions? And then we go to the values and they're like, how do we act? What's our behaviour expectations of ourselves and Environment Canterbury? And I think if you can put all of that onto one page with very few words, you've already got a huge tick from me, because the wordier we get, the easier it is to describe things and include it the thing you want the most in your basket, in the basket. And I'm hoping that this actually it does give enough direction for staff to feel comfortable in knowing what we want to move forward in the long-term plan. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think it's really good.
Good, Megan, thank you for that. Nettles?
Thank you. I have slightly less words than Megan, but same vibe. For me, the strategic direction is primarily about the vibe. If you use too many words, you're lost. It's not. If you need to explain it too much, well, that isn't a strategic direction. I agree the vision and purpose was good, and it still sets us on a course. The guiding principles to me are like the foundations upon which every other decision and every other action we do is based. It's there, it's quite clear. Thank you, staff, for listening so clearly to my colleagues as we went through the first couple of workshops, because I can see that reflected in that. I'm pretty happy, and I'm quite interested to see what colleagues think.
Kia ora, Nettles, thank you for that. Claire?
I'll be even shorter. My first impression when I read this last night was, yeah, that's pretty neat. I quite like the colours, I like the simplicity, and I think that's where we need to go, given the context that we're actually working in. So gets a big tick from me. I wouldn't change it too much, quite frankly, colour or setting or anything.
Kia ora, Claire, thank you. Andrea?
Yeah, you must be chuffed with yourselves because it's a good job. And I just tested the guiding principles against each one of those core services, and it works, and it will help us because we'll look at it and say, are we doing those principles in that core service? So yeah, thanks. This is helpful.
Ashley?
There's always got to be one who slightly disagrees, doesn't there? I, on the whole, 90% of this I really like. Back to the guiding principles and listening to how both Megan and Nettles describe them as how we make decisions or on which our decision making is based. I strongly feel that environment should be in there somewhere. Not dominating everything else, but it comes to the core tension, if you like, sometimes between fiscal responsibility and environmental responsibility. They're not always in tension, but they frequently are. And so I just feel very uncomfortable about fiscal responsibility being in there without environmental responsibility somehow being in there as well. And so that's the one place where I feel a level of discomfort.
Good, Ashley. Peter? Peter Scott?
Wake me up.
Yeah.
I just wonder, from my point of view, whether we need to emphasise that we have statutory responsibilities, and then there are other things that are associated with that we do. And it's not, to me, it's not apparent here. I don't think it's a bad job, but if we're looking at our crafting our LTP, that's where I'll be coming from in terms of our future, because I think that we need to concentrate on those things that we sit here for in the first instance.
It's in the middle. Middle block.
So that says requirements. I'm talking about responsibilities. They're different things to me, anyway.
Kia ora, Peter. John Faulkner?
Yeah, thank you for that. Overall, I think I like it really well. I'm probably getting right under the hood here, because one of the things that I look at, and with the changes that are coming at us with such pace, how that would reflect what I'd like to see from a catchment-based management, because we talk about that all the way through, no unintended consequences. And one way to do that is to have the staff that are engaged with the community at that catchment-based level, how they would be integrated into a system like this. And I know that the response would be that has been managed at a higher level, but there are a lot of insights that staff in the operational space have that we don't have, and I know that's getting well away from this, but I wonder how that could be integrated into here.
Kia ora, I have Ian. Yeah.
Look, just listen to the last. I think it's great the way it is. I have to say, so I'm with the team that thinks that. And in terms of Peter, I'm not sure why environmental regulation protection or the efficient and evident delivery of core statutory requirements doesn't tick his box, and I'm not sure why having a core service delivery of environmental regulation protection doesn't tick the environmental box. I think it's. I'm with Nettles, Megan, and Andrea, and everybody else who thinks it's pretty good the way, and Claire, who thinks it's pretty good the way it is. I think it's clear, simple. It covers all our requirements, and I don't think that the way it's written it suggests that environment is a second thought behind everything else. It sits there embedded in everything, as does mana whenua rights and all those sorts of things.
Kia ora, Ian. Over to you, Sarah, and then to Claire.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with Councillor Campbell. It should be environmental and fiscal responsibility. Yeah. So, I mean, it is a tension, and we have to. I think you articulated it very well. So, I'm very much, thinking about integration. The way our teams are working now. That we're pulling together, we're integrating, and I think that's that more holistic thinking is important when you're looking at especially catchment management, that you have to pull all the different sciences together and values together. So I would like to see the word integration or holistic thinking or something of that nature. I'm thinking Mātauranga Māori, but we've got people first and then communities at the centre, and I think it's. So I'm just wondering whether there's a possibility of that, whether it's a guiding principle.
Or a value.
or a value.
Would you just mind repeating, because they were good thoughts, but in terms of the team being able to, I was with you, but if you would mind, no, that's good, but if you wouldn't mind reflecting back to us again, just so the team could, right.
So, for effective catchment management, we need to have integration and holistic thinking. So
put integrated.
yeah, so we could put effective integrated catchment management.
And then environmental.
Yeah, and then environmental and fiscal responsibility. I'm hoping the word integrated can bring holistic thinking.
The values are holistic.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you for that. Moving on, we've got 3 in a row here. We'll go Claire, Nick, and John.
Just wanted to sort of address the question around the environment not being in there, and I think Ian sort of touched on it in answer to Peter's concerns around the requirements rather than the statutory functions. We've got to remember that the RMA actually sets out what we have as our responsibilities, and it's not just about the environment. Not even the current RMA is not just solely environment, and certainly what we've seen in the bills coming, it's certainly likely that, well, we know that they've already indicated it's going to be a wider consideration. So I think we have to be very careful if we start putting under the guiding principles environment there, because they are dealt with under strategic priorities and in the core service. The guiding principles to me are what's the important thing that the communities also are expecting from us. So fiscal responsibility there is from the ratepayer perspective in my eyes. So yeah, I don't think this, I think that the concerns of the environmental stuff are probably covered because they're statutory funded.
Ashley, I'll allow you just to say a few comments.
Look, I agree. I didn't say it was all environment. I said if these are how we're making our decisions and what we're basing our decisions on, then along with fiscal responsibility, we need to have environmental responsibility. And so to the point that environmental regulation and protection is in there, you can do environmental regulation and protection through a lens of focusing on fiscal responsibility, which will give you a very different outcome than if you do it through a lens of focusing on fiscal responsibility and environmental responsibility. I'm not saying that it needs to take dominance. What I'm saying is if this is how we are making our decisions, then it needs to be in there alongside fiscal responsibility. We need to acknowledge that tension, and if these are the lenses that we're applying to our decision making, then it needs to be in there along with everything else. Not that it's dominant, but simply that it's there.
Kia ora. Megan, is this the same point or something different?
So when I've quickly looked at it, I've gone, I wouldn't necessarily support adding an environmental principle just because the word environment isn't there, but hearing what you've just said now, Ashley, I think you've said this is overall really strong in terms of environmental outcomes overall, but if we're talking about how do we make a decision or what do we consider when we make a decision, then I am open to including something, but for me it would be, this is just my response, it's more about, rather than environment, it would be intergenerational stewardship. Yep. So if we put that in there, yep, then I think that is something that we could actually consider as a guiding principle.
Yep. Yep. Happy with that.
Yeah, but priorities, your strategic priorities are what we're going to focus on for the next few years. Your guiding principles are how we're going to make the decisions. So it doesn't matter, that's a value. That's about behaviour. Values are behaviours. So the principles are the framework for decision making. So just because you've used one word somewhere doesn't mean that you can't use that word somewhere else, because they're for different purposes.
Can I just say that I think would be a good outcome? I'm just that we need that focus in our guiding principles, along with all the other focuses or foci, depending on whether you speak Latin or not.
I just wonder at this point if it would also just help with this conversation, just some of the thinking behind the communities at the centre guiding principles. So when I reflected on the comments, from the previous workshop around environment, I saw that kind of communities at the centre being considering what outcomes the communities hold dear, being at the environment, economy, social outcomes. So that was just the rationale behind that one, just in case it helps as well.
John, same topic or something different?
Topic, and I reflect on Minister
Oh, yeah, I've got that.
Bishop talking about the economic and environmental being non-binary. So if a minister is sending that message, then why don't we take it up?
Andrea?
That's exactly
Sarah?
what I was going to say.
Yeah, I think we've got communities in there. We've got fiscal, economy. We need the environment and the guiding principles as well. I really feel strongly that we need the word environment under guiding principles.
So just before we go on, just
Environmental.
if it said environment and fiscal responsibility,
Yeah.
it's just adding one word. I don't know. I mean, because if you add intergenerational stewardship there, Megan, that'll be an additional.
We've got stewardship elsewhere. We could have intergenerational stewardship down in values.
But the principles, it doesn't matter about the word you use. Just because you use, if you had Muppet up here, right, and you have Muppet down here, you can have Muppet in both things because they're doing different things. Yeah.
Kia ora tātou, Emma?
I would just like to make that reminder really and just come back to that the values are something that have been really embedded within the organisation. So we did agree in principle that we would leave the values as they are. So and I understand you're now kind of trying to think about how to incorporate the feedback, but if we can focus on any changes being to either the guiding principles or to the strategic priorities, because I don't want to see us now going back to sort of making changes to the values.
Yes, kia ora. I think good point, Emma. Yeah, so vision and purpose, values, core service delivery, that's out. It's only the guiding principles or strategic priorities. So I mean, Stephanie.
On the basis of the korero that's happening, if we're looking at the guiding principles in the context of Councillor Mackay's comment about decision-making framework, I'm hearing it could be environment and fiscal responsibility, but it could also be evidence-based, intergenerationally focused, if that is more the direction of travel. Again, for you as councillors in terms of your prerogative, but in terms of the decision-making, and I appreciate they could feel different. I completely understand that, but just trying to bring this conversation to a focus on the decision-making principles for you.
Yep, Councillor.
Can I just think if we have to explain that environment is in there in these words, then we've kind of lost. I think it needs to be very clear that it's there. So the intergenerational, what did you say, intergenerational stewardship, that's very clear to me that it's in there. But also, and as I say, it's not an either or. It's just saying if we're looking through these lenses, then that lens needs to be there. It's not displacing anything, it's not being more important than anything, it's just being in there as a lens. And I take your point about communities at the centre, but again, that needs explaining, and we're not always going to be here to explain it. So if we're saying these are our guiding principles to somebody who's just trying to work out what we do, then those guiding principles need to be very clear about what they are. I have no problem with any of the other guiding principles at all. I just think we're missing one.
Good, Andrea. I'll go to Nick and then John.
I was just going to say, in reality, you guys, we do make decisions based on environmental and fiscal. We're constantly weighing it. I mean, I am. That's how I make my decisions. So I don't know why we just wouldn't put environmental and fiscal responsibility.
Good. We'll just go to Nick and then John and then Nick.
I'd like to congratulate the Metals team and staff on. I think this is a fantastic document, and we could sit here for hours trying to wordsmith lots of things, but I just think that it basically is covering off everything that we're trying to achieve going forward. Thank you.
Go to John.
Thank you. Very briefly, and the same. I like what sits up there, and when I'm talking to the community, others, don't think I have ever talked about the guiding principles. I've talked about Kiuta Katai, from the mountains to the sea. I've talked about the catchments. I've talked about efficient and evidence-based delivery and our statutory requirements and responsibilities of what we have to do versus what we might like to do. And we've talked constantly about data and services and support and what we need to do to put things in place. So for me, across the priorities, they are our priorities. We come to our core services. Again, I speak to our core services of those functions that we do, and they are represented. And so I like the document. It is simple. We have our values. We all understand our values. But again, I come back to the guiding principles. I've never explained them or talked about them to anyone in my life.
Kia ora, John. Yeah, probably similar to most councils around here, but it's in front of us now. I'm similar to Andrea because when I ever kind of weigh up issues and how I work things, it's kind of sometimes looking at the environment versus the fiscal, economics versus environment, and that's what a lot of the decisions in you look at Section 32s, etc. A long time it comes down to environment versus economics or fiscal. So I mean, it's one word. I'd be happy. I mean, this can go back to the team, but if there was just environment and fiscal responsibility, I mean, is that a big issue? Just one word? Is that a big issue, Peter Scott?
I think that our statutory responsibility, the obligations that we have, the reason we're in this room, it sets the task for us. Fiscal's a part of that. The fiscal to me is not about enabling anything. It's about when you take a dollar out of a ratepayer's pocket to do our job, that's our fiscal responsibility. It's no further than that for me. So I think what we're trying to do, and I'm getting grumpy about this, we're trying to jam words in here. We shouldn't be trying to... We know what our responsibility is. It should be as simple as possible for a 10-year-old to come in here and understand it. And I think the further we get away from that, the more explanation you have, the more time we're going to have to sit down and say, well, this is what it actually means. So I think it's quite a simple process. I'm quite a simple person.
Kia ora tātou. Well, I mean, staff have heard S&P. It's going to come to the S&P. Can you go to the next slide, please, on process going forward? Next steps.
Yeah, so we will be bringing a paper shortly to the next S&P committee on the 15th of July, and then the intention then it's goes to the council meeting for adoption the week later on the 22nd. So we will take the feedback and give some thought to that, and we can, the opportunity at this S&P committee is another opportunity for any changes.
fair warning to everyone, that means I'm going to come around and have a conversation about whether we include the word environmental or not and get a feel from everybody, because environmental people do turn up here and they do apply environmental protection in the decisions that they make. So I'll come and I will ask each of you how comfortable you feel about that, and then we will put it forward. And if people are uncomfortable with it, then they can do an amendment and we take the vote on it, because we just
Kia ora,
need to
Megan.
move
Thank you
it
for
forward.
that. Great way we're moving forward. We finished this part, moving on to the next. Do we call in someone else up to the table? Pardon? No? We've got the second part, long-term plan.
Just depends on how long this bit takes,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
But good time management to allow for this. Thank you.
Kia ora, Amy, back to you. Welcome back.
Kia ora tātou. As we roll on, here is the next instalment for our approach to the long-term planning process. And this is pretty brief. I'll hand over to Carmen.
Thank you, Amy, and good morning, everybody. We just really, through the next 10, 15 minutes, wanted to briefly recap what we heard from you at the workshop on the 11th of June, make sure we're on the right path and meeting your expectations, and then give you some insight into what we are planning as the next steps to formally begin our part of the long-term plan process, continuing on your conversations you've been having around the strategic direction. Okay, so this page here is what we believe we heard from you about the approach you want to take for the long-term plan process this time around. So what councillors endorsed was a service-focused transition-ready approach for the long-term plan. And that was when we went through the 3 different options and you got into groups and thought about the benefits and advantages and disadvantages of the different options, and which ones councillors landed with was the third option. That Giles was leading at the time, or Rizzo was leading at the time. So this means we'll be focusing on developing transition-ready plans for services and not a full redesign of the core services, which is what you've just been talking about earlier as well as part of the strategic direction. So we can expect we'll be making targeted changes to work programs and budgets, but not a wholesale change of the individual services within the core services. There'll also be a key focus on their infrastructure strategy and our financial forecasts, but we will not be focusing as much on reviewing outcome measures and service measures and other policies. And what we mean by that is staff will do a review of those outcome measures and service measures and the policies. We will bring anything back if we think there is something key to discuss with councillors, but we will not spend a lot of your time doing that unless we think it's really necessary. Okay, so this is the high-level timeline which you saw on the 11th of June workshop as well. So the only change we've made is across what we'll be doing in July, August, September and October, and really focusing more on what it means to have transition-ready plans for the core services. So we've removed the need to be looking at all the service measures or all the outcome measures over those coming 4 months. I'll just point out that the standard statutory processes remain in 2027, which is there will be an audit of our draft long-term plan before we go out for consultation. Obviously, we'll have our special consultative procedure where we need to provide options to the community to give us their feedback on. There'll be hearings processes, there'll be deliberations, and then there'll be the adoption process, which similar to what we did for the annual plan yesterday, but I'm expecting this one will take a lot longer for the long-term plan. So some changes to how we approach the next 4 or 5 months, but then the next 6 months of next year are still our standard processes that we must follow. And there's just a slight change to the workshop schedule to really make sure that we're trying to work through in a logical way with councillors what we'll be focusing on each month. So what we're proposing is in July, we will be focusing on what's the context each core service is operating in, what are some assumptions we need to make for that core service, be it transition-based assumptions or other assumptions for that particular core service, and what are the key priorities to be discussing with councillors over the coming months for each core service. And that will be an opportunity for councillors to be telling us, are we on the right track with what we're proposing the priorities are or not? So we really want to know from the July workshop, are we meeting your expectations and focusing on the right areas based on all the guidance you've given us so far? Then in August and September, we're proposing we'll get down to more individual work program level, the details around that. That will take some time to work through. So we have workshops in both August and September. And then October, we're looking more at the financial information that goes along with all those previous decisions or guidance that's been given. And then we've still kept some wrap-up workshops in November. We've found this has been very useful in the past where there's still outstanding bits and pieces to be tidied up, that we bring that information back together and make sure we've got a coherent picture to put into the long-term plan document itself. I'll pass to Pip for the immediate next steps.
Kia ora, councillors. Thank you, Carmen. Okay, so following your constituency week and then councillor recess, we'll be back here on the 15th of July through the Strategy and Policy Committee to progress those two workshops. So we've got the consecutive days. We have 4 hours scheduled across those 2 days, and they'll be about setting the scene for the LTP for each of the core services and that the 30-year infrastructure strategy. And then, as Carmen mentioned, workshops will continue through early August. Do want to note, as I think Councillor Scott pointed out yesterday, a key consideration in August is that deadline for Head Start proposals, which will influence the LTP. But so in closing, we are working hard to develop an iterative process designed to adapt as reform clarity improves. We may need to add more workshops into the schedule to accommodate any changes. And so I just want to check, do councillors have any questions for us or guidance for us at this point in time as we're looking, doing that iterative process to bring you back the information that you need for the long-term plan?
Thank you, staff, for the briefing. I have Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think I could stand on a street corner and talk about core services, but one of the things that we've spoke about this morning when Stephanie was in the room was about the integration of science and the support that's required around those. So is there going to be some sort of, commentary on how that integration works or the requirement for that integration? Because, of course, if you have a core service that you put out on its own, it might exist for some time. But when you have to inquire upon it, then you will need that expertise also. So is the thought been given to that at all?
We'll take that and build it into the next workshop and workshops after that. So so it won't be, I'll just clarify, it won't be us you'll be hearing from in those workshops. It will be the core service leadership group members, which involve staff from operations, science, strategy and planning and other staff. So it won't be us sitting at the table by and large, it will be the actual leads of each core service.
Supplementary?
Yeah, just there's obviously an opportunity there in terms of the effectiveness of core services support that's required to have a functional core service. And that's the thing, I think somewhere along the line we need to capture that, because that's the part of the fuller story, rather than saying, look, we need river engineers and we need people in biosecurity, but we also need scientists to actually ensure that the biodiversity happens where it needs to happen and those sorts of things.
The current way, so absolutely I take your point, and we're talking about these things in ELT as well, and that's the great worked example around rivers. It's not just Lee, it's actually Fiona's team. The decisions they make or the things that they do are evidence-based and based on the science. From the costing perspective, and for the story that we're trying to tell in terms of when we report back in performance, science is woven in there, but I absolutely take your point in terms of the strategic direction, and then for the LTP, sometimes that gets lost. So that's a really long way of saying what Carmen said, which was yes, we take your point. Thank you.
Kia ora, Amy. Thank you for that. Andrea?
Mine's just a history question. 12 workshops for LTP, I just added up. When the commissioners were here, how many did you do? 12 workshops for them?
Sorry, I wasn't here at that time either.
Yeah. That was no, not many workshops. It was different. No, they got no better. Well, I mean, do you want to? Oh no, I mean, because the minister directed the commissioners, and then they had a work plan to work to. Whereas when we were in the interim 2016 to 2019, we had LTP sessions, but they were different again because we've come out of 9 years of commissioners to a kind of a halfway council, and then it wasn't until the 2019-2022 when it was full elected back into a process of a fully elected council. And that's
Can I help you a little with this? Because I think one of the things that not so much myself, but other councillors and the commissioner base, the hybrid system talked about was biodiversity and the fact that the region needed a step change in biodiversity. Well, that certainly at the commissioner stage wasn't, and that's why I talked about the statutory responsibility. That's what they concentrated on. That's what the thing they were needed here. So, and when we had our commissioner-free council, that gave the ability to think about things in a different way. So I think that's the difference of the two models.
Kia ora, Stephanie.
The way I look at it is that when commissioners come in, they're statutory managers, which means they not only take the strategic functions, they take the senior executive functions. And while they had an executive team, they were very directive. And the manner in which they do that is functionally different. Whereas you have a governance management separation when we are in this current setting. So I'll just leave it at that. Happy to have other conversations.
Kia ora, John. Oh, no, sorry, Ashley.
I just want to agree with Peter and expand on what he said, that while you were talking, I was thinking catchment-based, that our transition needs to make that easy to happen. So we kind of need to start going down that path now. And I looked at several of the slides through both presentations, and so if we go back to the strategic direction, we've got effective catchment-based management. I've also got down here from one of them, integrated spatial planning, core service support, targeted transition. So I think that whole shift almost that we've expressed, that it needs to start making that happen and making it easy for whatever comes next to pick up the pieces and carry on in the same vein.
Kia ora, Ashley. Thank you for that. John F. Oh, Amy.
Just to add to that, so as we go forward in the chamber, we will get greater and greater granularity and detail. You can imagine if we started with, we chunked it differently, it would grind because you would be right in the detail immediately. But you would be doing it by core service or by service line. So, but I absolutely agree. And please note that we are taking that on board. We are also there should be hopefully an email going out today, but we are already well along in the process from the bottom up. So we consider you top down from the strategic direction and our governors. But we are, please be assured, we are working bottom up as well, going through our business plans, going through ELT is talking about their approach for how what is our thinking around transition. All of these things will come together, but we're doing our best to go as efficiently and effectively and at the same time. And this time for the LTP, we have chosen, haven't we? You have chosen, and we've been directed to include that transition element in the LTP versus having transition on one side and LTP on the other. So it's checks in the mail. It's coming, but yeah, it will be clearer the further along we go.
Kia ora, Amy. John F.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Just looking at the workshop schedule and next steps, and noting that the Environment Bill and the Planning Bill have been dropped out to 26th of June, and we would have been looking at the assumption that they were here virtually now, and then those 15, 16 July workshops would have been working on that premise. Is that going to have an impact on the quality of the workshops that we're having?
I think what we saw is we need to start somewhere, and that somewhere might be with making some assumptions, and those assumptions might change as more information comes through. So there may be some rework required. We don't have enough certainty to say, right, this is what we know everything right now, so we will have to build some assumptions into the process. And the other option would have been to wait until August to start having any more LTP conversations when more of this information has come to hand, but I feel like then we're getting behind with the process. So yes, I recognise it's tricky. There will be assumptions built into it, and those assumptions may be right or wrong, and we will have to change our course if we need to.
Kia ora, John. As you heard this morning, it's a fluid process. Things are going to be changing all the time, so we'll just have to adapt, and then staff will be on their toes, waiting for what's happening, and then we'll come down to us. But yeah, Ian McKenzie.
I don't think I've tried to listen to the conversation. I like what Ashley was saying in terms of trying to prepare a long-term plan for the transition, and I listened to the answers, and I wasn't sure I got any clearer. I have anything better sorted in my mind, but it seems to me within the core services, we've got whatever it is, 14 or 15 deliverables or outcomes. I would have thought that each one of those would be pertinent to have a workshop on each one of those individually, and that doesn't seem to be in the revised workshop schedule. We seem to have workshops lumped together for ERP and CPRH, and the only one who has a separate one is for PT, and I understand PT is half our budget, but in fact it's probably one of the ones that needs the least workshopping, because the certainty of its fate is perhaps more certain than some of the other functions that we're dealing with. And I just wonder whether in fact we need to reflect on that in terms of how we organise our workshops, and try to focus on the 15 or something regional functions rather than which sit under the core services. So you have ERP, and under that you've got biodiversity, biosecurity, environmental planning, all that sort of stuff. Under CPRH, it's a smaller one, but there's probably, there's two or three things there that need to be teased out in terms of where we need to focus our attention to get the budget sitting right. And I tried to read that into the third page, which was where you're talking about the recap of long-term plan, and you talk about key deliverables and other deliverables, and I got lost in your language, which doesn't equate to mine. So.
Okay, maybe I'll try and have clarify what we're thinking. So for July, we're thinking is still a higher level conversation at the core service level, because some of those, the context and assumptions may cover all 8 services under ERP, but councillors might say from that conversation we really just want to be focusing on our regulatory functions, or we want to be focusing on under CPRH rivers. Don't come back and talk to us much about CDM or Harbour Master services. We're broadly comfortable with that, but we really want to spend the next time we'd come back to be focusing on these particular services within the core service. So it would be getting down to that more granular level.
The alternative approach is to actually do the opposite. Say, look, Harbour Master, for example, needs a budget. They've got some capital investment required, relatively simple. That function is going to sit with somebody at some stage. Let's tick off the easy ones first, and then the ones where there's perhaps a bit more governance perspective and politics and discussion, you focus on after you've done all the easy ones. So if you can put aside, rather than say we assume that these are easy, we go through them and make sure they are easy, and then we do the more difficult ones.
we are building the presentation to go through every single service within the core services in that first workshop, but we'd be going through ERP, the 8 services. Do councillors agree these are the key services and priorities you want to be focusing on in more detail going forward? Same question for CPRH. There's 5 services. Of these 5, is it rivers and our flood warning service that you want to focus on, or do you want to focus on all 5 going forward? And it might be based on that we do have to put more workshops into the schedule, but we need to get that next level of guidance from you for each core service and the services within it. So.
Look, I think we're arguing about the same thing, so that's okay. But I would make the point that this is a new council, so there is a new reflection from the previous council, and so this, in the annual plan, it was very much a carryover of last council's views. That there is a new council, the politics are slightly different, but the major change is, of course, what's the shift to whatever happens down the line. And we need to reflect on that. And so I think it's appropriate that we do go through the detail of most of our deliverables to make sure that they're still pertinent, functional, and reflects the priority we're hearing back from our TAs.
Just to add to that, those are all really good points. I think one of the things that we, Patrick and I were talking about last night, actually, because we are in our planning LTP process as well as firmly thinking about transition, it's about working, and we'll take direction, but what is the right order for some of the steps? So Carmen's talking about, in this process, what do you want to do, or what is a priority? But then also, and another question, and equally as important, is what would we transfer? So what are we doing, and then the transferability. So it's I think it's teasing out those questions, and we can take direction in terms of by core service or by and then by line item underneath, whether we talk about what is our priority and then what is the transferability, which is some of the conversations we've been having with other councils and within ourselves for the in light of the simplifying local government. So it's and we can take direction on that. What mentally works best. Carmen's proposing that, and we can change that. Actually, the first step would be to work out what do we think's important, what do we want to do, and then the next step would be that transition element, and we would do all the prioritisation, and then look at the things again with the level of transferability, or we can do that by core service, get into the detail. What do you want to do? What's the priority? And then what's the transferability? So there are we can take direction of actually what works best for the council. We need to do both of those things. Just really mindful for the team in terms of our to meet our statutory deadlines for the LTP. We have to have a decent draft by November, but actually, I guess looking on there, 9 August for simplifying local government, we also probably need to have some ideas about transferability. But these are the things that we're actively talking about for ELT and for the organisation. So, Stephanie, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, Stephanie, you can finish off.
I do, and I'm going to be directive here. My staff cannot do this in a different order because of the dynamics externally. We do have a new council, and therefore we do need to make sure that you see everything under the hood. We'd like that direction. But what I've also asked the teams to do, and this is quite new, it's really only happening in real time, but what we are talking about is what you have given us direction on, which is if we do things that are our statutory requirement, are we delivering them to a platinum or a bronze? What's really required to deliver those? And then second of all, we've been discussing, and this is in a nascent stage, is what is the state of maturity for these? And because of the current suggestion by central government, if we are to hand these over or indeed create a new regional entity that has to deliver multiple functions that's not called a regional council, my view as chief executive is those services must be in a form that our communities do not have disruption to critical services. Now, to be able to do that, I am putting immense pressure on my staff at a time when none of this was forecast in a budget that does not easily allow for it. So I'm going to be very directive with my staff, and they are my staff, and that is to say, this order is like this so that we give enough wiggle room and clarity for you, but I also need to give my teams the ability to get that information in a form that you can actually make good decisions on. So Amy's right. I'm going to intervene and say, as much as I hear councillors, there is an element of what we can deliver and in what time frame.
Kia ora, Stephanie. Thank you for that, for clarifying, and so the councillors could hear that. Thank you, team. Thank you for that presentation. We look forward. No, sorry, Sarah. We're moving on. We've got a short time frame because we've got a wānanga this afternoon. So thank you once again. We're going to move on to the Community Vehicle Trust Review findings, and that's Giles, Stewart, Claire, and Noel, I think. Kia ora. We got half an hour for this, and Stewart knows how to speed read. Kia ora, Giles.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to provide visibility of the results of the review of the Community Vehicle Trust that's been completed by the team. That was requested a few months ago by Council.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. And can I just introduce to you Claire Collins? You probably haven't met her before. She's our Community Transport Advisor. And Claire has been doing an awesome job pulling all this together and building strong relationships with our trusts, so has a good lot of knowledge to share with us. Thank you.
Kia ora, everybody. Thanks for having us. Today we're looking at the findings of the Community Vehicle Trust Review, which was carried out between September 2025 and February 2026. And that was to help us understand the current state of the sector. The review was prompted by the deputation by the Waimati CVT on the 26th of February in 2025. So the main takeaway from the review is the sector in Canterbury is healthy. This is largely a really good news story with a few targeted actions for us to follow up on.
I'll just note also that we'll take the slide pack as read because there's quite a few slides and recognising your own time constraints. And we're going to focus on a few of the key slides as we go through. So we'll flip through some of these. Cool. Background, is that it? Yep.
So a bit of background on what the CVTs actually are. They're community-led volunteer charitable organisations providing transport in areas where public transport is limited or unavailable. There are currently 17 trusts operating across Canterbury, from Kaikoura in the north to Waitaki in the south, and the sector has grown organically over time. They all operate slightly differently. Canterbury Regional Council supports them through annual grants, regional coordination and advisory support. 2 of the 17, Waimati and Geraldine, also offer total mobility services, which becomes a little bit relevant later on. The other 15 trusts are effectively providing total mobility services to their communities, as they are also catering for the travel disadvantaged and the isolated communities, enabling them access to medical and social services. It's interesting to note that the trusts are independent entities with their own internal governance structures. They are not contracted services. So this slide's setting out the scope of the review and what we actually set out to do. The review aimed to assess the performance and sustainability of the trusts, identifying any systemic issues or risks for the sector and for the Canterbury Regional Council. It also aimed to provide visibility on funding equity, confirming any immediate support requirements, and confirm Council's role in supporting the sector. So the main takeaways, the review confirmed the sector is performing strongly with no systemic issues identified. The model is stable, financially sound, and delivering high-value outcomes for communities across Canterbury. There are two areas for us to act on, some administrative improvements within the Canterbury Regional Council and the specific issues at the Waimati Trust, which had led to their deputation last year. The review found that the sector is performing strongly. Here are some numbers that show the scale and value of the sector. During the period of the review, the Canterbury sector as a whole delivered around 30,000 passenger trips, completing over 900,000 kilometres of travel throughout the region, with volunteers contributing 30,348 hours during this time. At the current living wage of $29.90, that's roughly $900,000 of donated time. The majority of the trusts reported they're effectively meeting community needs. Services are flexible, they're locally tailored, and they're highly valued. This is a strong value for money story. So Waimati was the one trust facing genuine pressure, and it's worth understanding why. 98% of its trips are total mobility related, which by nature of the scheme brings higher administrative and operational costs. It was receiving lower grant funding than any other trust. This has now been addressed in the 2026-27 annual plan. There were driver availability constraints and some governance capability gaps. The review found that without intervention, there was a real risk of reduced service levels, volunteer strain, and less transport access. So this is a targeted case, not a sector-wide problem. These issues have been largely addressed through changes in internal trust governance. They have a new chair, the admin cost burden has been worked through, the new total mobility contract, which was finalised in May this year, has provided guidance and clarity and has opened up collaboration opportunities with the Geraldine Trust to provide required training for their volunteer drivers at a much lower cost. Waimati Vehicle Trust and Geraldine Vehicle Trust are the only known volunteer-run total mobility operators in the country. So this brings us to what we're asking of Council. Firstly, to note the CVT sector is performing well with no systemic issues. Secondly, to support us developing a funding framework. The funding framework is the main forward-looking item. It improves transparency and equity of funding allocation within the sector. Here are the recommended improvement opportunities coming out of the review. Develop a clear, equitable funding methodology for the sector. Develop shared messaging and simple promotional material to lift public awareness of the types of services the CVT provide for their communities within the Canterbury region. Create a document register and an operations guide, building and consolidating on existing information. Continue monitoring data reporting and assess the feasibility and value of a members portal. 21. One of the key insights from the review is the value of Canterbury Regional Council's role is not just about the annual grant. It's also about the value of regional coordination and sector advocacy, which has kept the sector connected, informed and supported. Regional coordination has been a key strength of the Canterbury CVT's model, giving the Trust a clear point of contact and a collective voice. During the review period, Canterbury Regional Council support has helped trusts navigate regulatory and governance changes, including charitable governance requirements and transporter operator licensing matters. This coordination supports consistency, collaboration and confidence across the sector, helping these small volunteer organisations to respond to changing requirements without each trust having to solve the same issue in isolation. As local government reform progresses, consideration needs to be given to how regional knowledge, advocacy and oversight are maintained so the value built up over the years is not lost. So the suggested focus is to preserve what is working well, clear regional oversight, practical support for the trusts and a collective voice for community transport across Canterbury. Thank you.
Kia ora. Anything else, Stuart? No?
Just open for questions.
All right. Kia ora. I have Peter Scott and then Claire.
Thanks for this. Look, I was aware of what was happening at Waimate, and I think I'd spoken to you, but I wasn't aware of the progress that you'd made down there. I think the Community Vehicle Trusts are one of the great unsung successes that we have across the region, and so there's a couple of comments I want to make about that. One is that we don't need to lose access to this. But I also think you highlight a really good problem that Waimate had faced, where they didn't have drivers that were qualified for the bigger units. And those smaller communities that actually use these things really well for access to health services and other things possibly require more capital than the others, because those I think the vans that you don't need to be a qualified, you don't have to have a passenger service license to operate, are a great benefit. And you highlighted the fact that Waimate uses most of it for that assistance. As part of this, is there an opportunity to look for more support around providing those smaller communities with support so they can do the things that they're doing?
Could you just clarify what you mean by more support for these folks?
Well, for example, the cost of a vehicle that doesn't need a person with a passenger service license to take a wheelchair, for example, is greater than like your normal vehicle. So it's just about how many of those are available. I'm not too sure of the model that they use, but I think they got a second-hand one in the end.
They've just bought a new one from Germany. They're waiting for that to come in, and it was $100,000.
So I guess that's my point. My point is that the capital costs of those things are quite high. They are specific, but what they do is they widen the opportunity to have that service, which that's one of the things. And so, if it's disability service, is there an opportunity with Whataora or others to help with funding those things, health services to help fund those things?
I'm not so sure about that avenue. The trust as they are at the moment have the ability, and some do, seek grant funding from all sorts of sources. So Canterbury Regional Council's grant is but one of a number of sources of grant funding for these organisations. And when the grant arrangements were set up through Canterbury Regional Council, it was expected and intended that we would not be the sole financial supporter for the trusts. Another key nuance here is for Waimate and Geraldine, who are registered total mobility providers, they must comply with the small passenger service vehicle rules and the Land Transport Management Act. So they must have certificates of fitness for their vehicles, etc. And whereas the other trusts are not operating under those same critical rules. For our total mobility providers, which includes Geraldine and Waimate, we already provide a mechanism for them to apply for additional funding for wheelchair retrofits, bearing in mind it doesn't cover the full cost of that, and there are caveats that come with that money. But council ultimately does have the choice of reviewing and changing the grant allocations across the region for each trust, and that's kind of what Claire was alluding to about creating a framework that's more appropriate for today's world and is transparent and deals with the equity issues with these people.
Kia ora, Stuart. Claire?
So you've just segued quite nicely into the question I have, and I I've sat here and I know that we have targeted rates for specific community vehicle trusts, and I acknowledge the good work they do and that they do get grants from others, particularly in the ones I know of in North Canterbury. We've got quite a number in North Canterbury. But can you just explain, when you talk about Canterbury Regional Councils providing some grants, that is from the targeted rate we collect. Now, obviously, my understanding, my recall, hope I'm correct, is that NZTA provides some funding. Is that the similar as the FAR rate currently, or that was the sixth?
Yeah, so NZTA subsidise will match our money. So if we give a grant of say $10,000, we provide 4,000. NZTA provides 6. And that 4,000 is collected through a targeted rate for the community that uses the trust.
And then for the likes of Waimate and Geraldine, who do the mobility one, do they get extra funding that we do as well? Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, so with the total mobility arrangement, as you might recall from our conversations on that, the fares that the customer pays are subsidised. So the customer gets the subsidy, not the operator. Yeah.
Supplementary, Claire?
I'm going to do Councillor Gerard here, and you're going to have to come back to me because it just disappeared out the window.
Kapai. John F.
Yeah, thank you for that. I immediately went to the local government reform considerations, and and I noted that 900,000 K of volunteer time, and the problem with Waimate and new chairs making a change, a positive change. And are the chairs getting remunerated, or so it's all volunteer time? Right. So that goes to the previous conversation that we had, where there was a core service consideration and whether we go through things line by line. And I think this sort of indicates that it is a line by line assessment, that it appears to me that it should be stay at a regional level to be effective. I know there's benefits both ways to go to local to regional, and they'd need to be teased out, but I'm after opinion.
So I can provide some thoughts on that. So Canterbury currently has the most vehicle trusts in its region across the Motu. So there are other trusts in the North Island and one that we're aware of in Otago. And we do, Claire specifically, collaborates with her counterparts in those regions because they learn a lot from the work we've done, and we've learned a lot from the work they've done, particularly in the Waikato. They've been pretty active in this. I guess what I would suggest is that ultimately the outcome that the trusts will be looking for is the coordinated advocacy and support. Now, the question you're asking is how to deliver that. Should it be delivered through one entity in Canterbury, as its case at the moment, or could it be delivered through the unitaries that have the trust within their areas collaborating together? Or could a unitary put its hand up and say, I'll be the representative for all of the trusts? So there are different ways of solving that problem. I think the important thing is to recognise that there's value in that coordinated advocacy in the first instance.
Kia ora, Stuart. Thank you for that. I'll go to Andrea and then Ashley.
Thank you. I'm wondering if this framework could be enabling for more of a hybrid thing as we get older, live longer, lose our licenses, because I have constituents in Governors Bay and Littleton, right? There's kind of a public transportation route. They want to have their own vehicle. And in Sumner, we have our own vehicle, but we do that all off our own backs. So I'm wondering if this framework could help people who aren't in the system, but the things like getting the licensing, the coughs, all that kind of the admin that does cost us quite a lot. Is there a way that this framework could help communities who maybe fall outside that geographical?
So I think the existing framework that we've got now probably needs a bit more detail in it to branch out to those other regions. For example, Governor's Bay did actually used to have a trust operating out there, which folded after COVID. But yes, I think that if we look at it at the big picture, it could be a really good opportunity to be able to get more people involved. Obviously, the rates are going to have to pay for their it's something that could be looked at, I think.
Because if you lose your license, well, because you're old, but you want to stay in your community, I believe there's a case for this. I think there's a hybrid.
Yeah, that's dead right. And actually, funny you say that, because I just had somebody contact us. She'd lost her licence. She's 76. She lives in Waddington and she's trying to get to Rolleston for her knitting group. So the Darfield Trust is going to be looking after her and getting her to where she needs to go.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit more to that conversation, one of the things that has come out of this review is the lists possible that as a coordinating council could undertake on their behalf. And I think that's what you're alluding to there, where we might coordinate and do the administrative process of applying for offs and what have you. We might do create the promotional collateral for their community so they know the trust exists. So those are additional administrative or general activities or burdens that Canterbury Regional Council could choose to undertake. We would need to fund those. I guess the cautious view is, given the landscape now, we kind of just need to be careful what else we take on, as we need to understand that inevitably it needs to go somewhere else. Yeah.
Kia ora, Stuart. Thank you for that. Ashley, and then I'll finish off with Claire.
Actually, the last two kind of stole my thunder. I was going to simplifying local government and how do we retain that regional coordination and sector, because that's obviously a big need. And also I was thinking of the edge of Christchurch communities. You went to Governor's Bay, my mind went to Kainga and Dispensable, which I get emails about, when can we get a bus here? So I just think that, first of all, I want to say this was just superb. It opened my eyes to it, and I think it's probably, in many ways, our most efficiently spent public transport money. You know, we put in very little and we get in a huge amount. And so I just really want to support the continued focusing on how we can provide, how that advocacy and that coordination can continue no matter what comes next, and also looking at those hybrid models and perhaps semi-urban areas that the buses might not do the job. And yeah.
Good, Ashley. Claire, have you got your...
Yeah, it went out one ear and one the other. But just going back to the funding framework, but the earlier discussion there, my understanding is, well, can you tell me, do we consult on it when people want a new community vehicle trust? We do. Okay, thank you. And so therefore, if we're developing a formal funding framework, which I'm assuming might need more money, we have a free license just to increase that at will. I think it was quite different in the Waimate situation where we weren't taking the right amount. Is that correct or something?
I think, to be fair, our institutional knowledge of what happened in Waimate to set up their grant levels in the first place we don't have that knowledge because we weren't here. But yes, so Canterbury Regional Council can make a determination around the level of grant funding, but ultimately we need to apply for NZTA share through the National Land Transport Fund, and if they choose not to increase their share, then Canterbury Regional Council would need to determine whether it was willing to increase its share. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's a small amounts of money, but it all counts. It's all ratepayers that pay.
Just a little bit.
Is that a carry on?
I think you've highlighted a few things here that are important. The Waimate thing in terms of the transition between managers and actually capturing I mean, that's what small communities have. That when management changes, you can lose some of that, if you like, the IP, and so they become difficult. And they sort of fall into a bit of a trough and they get picked up again. So one of the things that possibly could be considered is have a centralised sort of support system for that, because, and to me, that's where the hole is. You know, same in Kuria and same in Twizel, same in wherever, Geraldine. It's a Pleasant Point. Yeah.
Kia ora, Councillor Scott, once again, you're hitting the nail on the head. Tēnā, you're on fire today. Thank you, Stuart and Claire. I mean, you've highlighted, and I think the councillors have teased it out, that, you know, going through reforms, etc., you know, a coordinated advocacy, you know, one entity across Canterbury is kind of, you know, important, and it's kind of put on the list for us to think about another activity that, you know, a one entity looks at. So if that's regional councils or another entity, but that's another one put on the list. But thank you both, Claire. Thank you for coming today. Stuart and Giles, pleasure. Thank you. We're moving on to the next briefing, the Emergency Management Bill number 2. I think we have Amy, Jesse, Bridget and James. Kia ora, James Thompson. Welcome again to Council. Kia ora. Over to you, is it, Jesse? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair. Through you, just firstly like to introduce the team. I've got Bridget Lang, Principal Strategy Advisor in my team in Strategy and Planning, and James Thompson, our Regional Manager Group Controller for Regional Emergency Management. So the purpose of today is to brief Council on the Governance and Administration Committee report back on the Emergency Management Bill number 2. We'll outline some of the key changes and implications for Canterbury Regional Council and the Canterbury Civil Defence Emergency Management Group, and we'll signal some of the areas where future council decisions will be required. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bridget. She'll take you through the slides. There's a lot of information there today, so we'll try to summarise that and work through. And we'll take questions at the end, Chair, if that's okay.
Kia ora, thank you, Jesse. Like Jesse said, I'm going to just quickly try and go through some highlights from the slides. I know there's quite a big slide deck there. And then James and I are available to obviously clarify anything perhaps at the end. Like Jesse said, the briefing is to take you through the report back of the Governance and Administration Committee on the Emergency Management Bill number 2, with a particular focus for what it means for Canterbury. As Jesse noted, there's no decision required today. This is primarily to provide an overview and focus on where the committee has landed with its recommendations, how it aligns with comments that have been made by the Joint Committee, the Mayoral Forum and Canterbury Regional Council through our submission process, and what this might mean in practice. A key point that I'd like to make up front, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide, I've just seen. A key point that I'd like to make up front is that this bill is a refinement of the current system. It's not a redesign of the emergency management system. So the real impact of this bill will come through implementation and how we respond to the proposed changes locally and regionally. So while there's no immediate decision required today, implementation and will require future decisions by the Joint Committee and by this Council, particularly around the funding implications, and that will need to come through the long-term planning process. I'd also note that some of the content in this is still draft. It's quite an evolving space, and we will provide further advice as it's available. So, why is reform needed? The bill is a recognition that we are seeing changes in natural hazard consequence and complexity. We are seeing more frequent and intense weather events. These events are occurring in new regions, and at the same time, events are becoming more resource intensive. It's also been widely accepted that the current system is not fit for purpose to be meeting these pressures and lacks the capacity or capability to deal with significant events, especially if they happen across multiple regions at once. And this is the fundamental driver of reform, as reinforced by this visual. This visual reinforced that increasing pressure and the complexity on the system, demand, risk and cost are all moving upward at the same time. So the purpose of the Emergency Management Bill is to address those pressures, those increasing pressures. The bill will replace the Emergency Management Act of 2002, and as mentioned earlier, it's on the existing framework rather than replacing it. The government isn't trying to solve all the system challenges through primary legislation alone. The whole of society approach that has been signals a shift in expectations around this shared responsibility, and that it's not just government-led response to these pressures. This slide highlights that reform has been going through for about a decade, for nearly a decade, beginning with the 2007 TAG review that came after the Kaikoura earthquakes and the Port Hills fire, the first Port Hills fire. From that, there was the trifecta program was developed, which included introduction of a new emergency management bill. Then in 2023, there was the North Island severe weather event, an inquiry into that event, and the government's response to the findings, the report that came out of that inquiry. One of the government's responses to the NISWE inquiry was to discharge the previous emergency management bill so that the findings from the NISWE inquiry could be factored into any legislative changes. And that's what brings us to today, because late last year there was a new bill introduced and in December last year, and that began the select committee process that we have been part of. The fact that it's been going on for a decade gives confidence that the issues are well understood. But, and that also means that expectations across the sector are quite high, and that will come through, some of that will come through in bits that I touch on. So the other key point, and you'll be hearing this across your briefings, is that this bill is just one part of a major reform program, and success will depend on alignment across the system, not just within this bill, which we'll see in the next slide. Emergency management does not sit or operate in isolation. It connects directly to resource management, climate adaptation, infrastructure planning and local government reform. So there is a risk that we're aware of that how well this bill lines up with everything else will be determined how well we can implement it. And that is something that Canterbury has consistently been raising through all of the consultation periods. Just flick through that. We've included this slide because it just as a reminder, because it's really useful in providing the context that the bill largely retains this structure. We're not moving into a completely new model. We're adjusting how the existing one operates, and the changes were made into this. So it's not a transformational reform. It's perhaps more incremental. So from here, I just want to go through some of the Select Committee's recommendations, how that compares to our submissions. And when I'm referring to our submissions, I'm referring to the Joint Committee, the Joint Committee on Reform submission and Canterbury Regional Council's submission earlier in the year. And then to talk about some of the implications. So firstly, overall, the Governance and Administrations Committee report back is broadly consistent with what we said in our submissions, and that the emergency and the view that the emergency management system needs stronger roles, better planning, clearer power and stronger accountability. However, the recommendations of the committee are more cautious and procedural than what the Canterbury submissions have said in a number of areas. The committee has largely focused on clarification and workability of the bill, and there has been some targeted improvements to the bill as it was introduced. So one of the key reasons for the bill that tried to modernise was the strengthening the role of iwi Māori. The bill strengthens consultation, but it does stop short of a shared governance with iwi Māori. There is a strong recognition that of Māori perspectives, but not formal decision-making authority at the governance level. In practice, the legislation will set a minimum expectation, but there is scope and responsibility for us to determine what that partnership looks like in Canterbury. The bill also strengthens the role of communities and community engagement. The recommendation from the committee strengthens the concept of disproportionately affected communities, but does not list them, very deliberately does not list what is meant by disproportionately affected communities, and this aligns pretty broadly with Canterbury's position. This is positive, but it does also place more demands on us in terms of our requirements around engagement and planning. The implications for where, if the recommendations of the committee are enacted, is that this leaves a policy and relationship management gap for us here in Canterbury. If we want strong partnerships with Ngāi Tahu and meaningful engagement with disproportionately affected communities and other communities, that will need to be actively planned for, designed and resourced at a regional level. And if the bill proceeds in its current form, ECAN and the Canterbury Seeding Group, which will become something named differently, will still need to consider how we give meaningful effect to our partnership with Ngāi Tahu within the regional governments, even if the legislation stops short of mandating full voting mana whenua representation. We will also need to prepare for more formal engagement with disproportionately affected communities and rural communities, while noting that we already have a really strong relationship with rural communities through RAG, but we will need to also be looking at that about how we make decisions or how decisions are made around representation, resources and capability to support meaningful participation. In terms of roles and responsibilities, both Canterbury submissions supported statutory roles, responsibilities and accountabilities, but argued that the bill left too many points of ambiguity. There has been useful clarifications, though, in this in the recommendations by the committee, particularly around lead agencies, which both submissions made quite a few comments about that. However, I would note that some of the harder issues, particularly around recovery, leadership and transition, have not been fully resolved. And that means in a complex event, there is still room for ambiguity at exactly the point where you want clarity, which was a point that we raised in our submission. So the potential implications of that is that the bill provides a framework, and we do expect over time that there will be more detail would be provided in secondary legislation. However, the report pack commentary does not adopt the more ambitious proposals that we suggested for explicit statutory mechanisms for post-transition recovery, transfer and governance. This is one of the a really clear, unresolved issue in terms of where our perspective was, and we should expect the need to still develop bespoke recovery arrangements for large events as we currently do now. I'd also note that the view that the bill underplays the operational load on administrating authorities, and that has real implications for staffing, funding and expectations. Minimum standards and compliance is probably an area where there's been the most significant shifts from in the recommendations versus the bill as it was introduced. There is a clear move toward stronger central oversight and standardisation and accountability. And that is likely to lift consistency across the system, which is something that I think we've all said that we wanted. But it does introduce more formal obligations and with that more scrutiny and more needs for reporting. The bill as introduced, the other point I'd make that it's not actually noted on the slide, but the bill as introduced in December somewhat downplayed the National Disaster Resilience Strategy, and positively the committee's recommendations will lift the strategy back up and have more oversight to it. So that is a positive thing. In practical terms, these changes to minimum standards and compliance will mean more assurance, more evidence and more documentation. And importantly, those requirements come regardless of whether there's any increases in funding. And this creates a pressure, which I note on the next slide regarding funding. Funding is explicitly out of scope of this bill. So we have increasing expectations, but no confirmed mechanism for how we are going to support them or meet those increasing expectations and compliance needs. The likely outcome of that is there will be greater pressure on local government budgets and potentially, and we noted this in our submissions, that there could be uneven implementation across the country, which is antithetical to one of the main things that around standardisation that the bill is trying to achieve. This issue around funding will need to be considered by this council and the joint committee through LTP processes. Infrastructure is an area where Canterbury's position was not adopted. In particular, flood protection and telemetry infrastructure was not explicitly recognised, which is something that we very strongly called for during our submission to Select Committee and also in previous consultations. The implications of this is that there's implications for visibility, prioritisation and planning disciplines around that. They will still happen, but it doesn't have the same eyes on that inclusion in the bill would have. What that means is that the responsibility stays with us to make that strategic case for these systems and the criticality of flood protection infrastructure, particularly in how they underpin the broader resilience, the resilience system. This is an ongoing piece of work that's been led by Lee Griffiths' team and will continue to do so. In terms of changes to declarations, powers and protections, this has had quite a positive area of change. There is a better recognition of the need for to act early and preventatively, and stronger protections for those who are acting in good faith. These new protections, practically, this should mean that people can act without hesitation and support more proactive decision making, which is important given how quickly events can escalate and change, and notes that it's not always done. Action doesn't always have to happen. Doesn't always happen after a declaration has been made. As noted earlier, this bill's success will require integration with other legislation. There has been recommendations by the board that will embed emergency management into core planning systems, and the link to the long-term plans and proposed amendments to the Local Government Act is particularly important. This change, recommended by the committee, means that emergency management won't be a standalone activity. It's acknowledging that it's part of a broader system that explicitly has to be planned for in LTPs. This creates stronger alignment, but it does also mean more independence across councils, which will require more coordination and potentially more complexity in decision making and negotiation. So in terms of timing, the key point here is this will move quickly. Some things will come into effect almost immediately on enactment of legislation, while others give a pretty short window to prepare. The speed of change means that there's actually a limited runway for implementation and for understanding how we do so in the context of a broader legislative changes. With that being said, the next step for us is to continue to track the bill as it progresses. The government has stated its intention to pass this bill within this term, so we expect the second and third reading to obviously occur before the House rises in September. We would like to come back and provide more detailed advice on funding, resourcing and implementation, including how changes under the Simplifying Local Government may end up affecting emergency management generally and emergency management committees specifically. The makeup, form and function of local government has a material impact on how these changes proposed in the bill will be implemented. And we'll also continue to work with our regional partners on how to implement these changes. I'm happy to stop there and James and I can take questions.
Kia ora, Bridget. That was a quick 15 minutes, a lot of information. Thank you for that. I'll go to John, and then Peter.
Thank you for that. And I don't have any specific questions, but I do note some of the challenges that flow through funding being one of those issues where we have change, but there is no appropriation or budget to follow that. So it falls back onto regional and local. Also note that the new bill still talks about national, regional and local. And so how do we integrate national, regional and local with simplification for local government? Yes, they talk about unitaries within the bill and it provides opportunities, but there's this expectation that there will be those three levels of action or governance or practice or management. So how that relates within the simplification is a challenge. Infrastructure, really disappointing that we could not get that one across the line, particularly given the challenges in the North Island, the flood events, which were all about rivers and resilience and floods and whatever. Yes, there's the potential of a cost being visited upon us if they did become infrastructure and some challenges of responsibility, but yeah, one of our significant issues around that, but they're not covered in that space. And again, the complexity that is spoken of or to around across entities. At the moment, we have a Canterbury region and we talk with our fellow regions and the SIG, and everyone works together what it will look like if we break up into smaller entities, how we have that further conversation of what is required and needed to be joined up if we start to break into entities is again another challenge. And yeah, still not really clear in my mind around lead agency and transitions between lead agency work and the role of the new emergency committees and a bunch of things that sit in there, which I guess time will sort of roll out. I was talking to my son about some CBR stuff on the weekend and an exercise that they're looking to do within the military. Okay, well, is civil defence involved? Are you involving NEMA? Oh, we haven't decided who we're inviting yet, but unless they have security clearances, we can't really talk to you. So again, we can talk about lead agencies and a whole bunch of things, but we still have a disconnect across agencies in a sense when it comes to things that might come to play, things that go bang or chemical or whatever. But thank you for that. And we recognise the challenges, but it's a challenge that we as a group will need to think about and understand. And when it comes to budgets, we will sit in a group or the joint committee and no mayor will want to extend the budget because everyone wants to keep their rates down. But we do have a responsibility and there is an expectation that things will change and change costs. So how do we achieve that funding or the appropriate funding to put that change in place when it's mandated, but no one wants to pay for it?
Kia ora, John. John F.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of points of clarification, and I'll go to the first one, which was in regards to the lack of adoption of iwi on any of the board seats. And I'm just trying to get my head around why that is, because quite often in the emergency circumstances, iwi open up the marae willingly, and so I'm just a little bit confused around why that is happening. I've got a little bit of a general idea, but the other one that I noted was on the that the Rural Advocacy Group is a current member of the Canterbury CDEM coordinating executive, and no argument with it. They do a good job. But when I think about some of the other organisations, the Landcare Group or Murray Irrigation or some of the others, they have far more depth into the community and could play a larger role. So those two issues there.
Step in and answer the first one, because it's a governance question, not a management question around iwi Māori. So within the Canterbury group, we have iwi Māori, we have representatives of Ngāi Tahu, and whilst they are not officially at the table legally in the sense, they have equal speaking and voting rights, so we have put that in place. And so that's a decision that we have made, and my expectation is that will continue. Why government has done what government has done, I'm not sure. The previous government would have had 1-for-1 representation. So I think we've got to push back from where one government and entity were taking things to push back to the extreme of the other. But there is nothing to stop any entity having those folk at the table, and they will continue to be there, particularly within our North Island constituencies. But I'll let them talk about RAG.
Kia ora, James.
Thank you. I can probably sort of answer some of those a little bit more too. In regards to the iwi Māori piece, yes, currently we do have a position on our joint committee for iwi Māori. Previously that was Elizabeth Cunningham, who many of you will know, but that's a vacancy at the moment. Under the new bill, should it go through, there's an ability to co-opt iwi Māori onto the joint committee. At the moment, it looks like they would have voting rights, but would not be able to declare a state of emergency or be part of that decision-making process around a declaration of a state of emergency. But there's also other legislation going through government at the moment that may actually prevent a person who's co-opted on being able to vote. So we need to be very cautious of that, but at the moment, the way the legislation stands, we can co-opt them on and they would be able to vote. And then when we look at the coordinating executive group, we, at this stage, are required to have a Māori representation on it, but it's not mana whenua. But we've got an option of saying, we can make it a mana whenua representation at that executive level. In regards to RAG, you are absolutely right, Landcare, the irrigators, a whole lot of those sorts of very community-orientated groups. They are members of our Rural Advisory Group. So Rural Advisory Group has about 50 or 60 members, including meat processors and the fertiliser companies, Fonterra, etc. So we get a view from them at our meetings.
Kia ora, James. Thanks for that. Yeah, unfortunately, as James and John have mentioned, that those representation on those committees for mana whenua, especially with the new bills coming through, is probably taking that ability away. But as John Faulkner mentioned, that first and foremost, a lot of the areas that open up first to the marae, who look after look after communities, etc. So one thing you probably didn't want is, because marae and especially up in the North Island say they'll do what they do, and if it conflicts with some of the other things, they don't care, because they'll just carry on and show their manaaki and look after people. So hopefully that doesn't come into a conflict further on down the track. Bridget.
Just to note, and this is the I guess my point earlier about this being quite an evolving draft information is that the cabinet material around simplifying of local government, that amendment, our read is that this might be excluded from that piece, that statutory committees that are made under other legislation, even if it's under Schedule 7 of the LGA, could be excluded. But again, we just need a bit more time to really work through that because it hasn't landed. So, yeah, that one's a bit of a... We'll come back and see what that means, and the implications for this particular legislation.
Kia ora, Bridget. Peter Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Bridget, may I say at the top end here is that thank you for the depth of your and the width of your knowledge and understanding. It's reassuring that we've got someone in a building that's got your knowledge on this, because it would take me like 5 years to catch up with you, I think, if I had to think about it. So my question is this: when we see emergency management happen in real time, James, we seem to be really good at it, actually, and here anyway, and everyone seems to be competent. So in terms of the legislation that we're talking about and you're talking about, how does that change the operational efficiency and your capacity to actually do the job?
Yeah, good question. So the intent of the rules and the standards that the Minister or the Director of Emergency Management will be able to make under the new bill should, and I would suspect will, increase or make it a requirement that we increase our ability to respond. So I don't think we're going to lose any operational capacity. If anything, it's going to become better. However, as indicated, that's going to come at a cost of some form. The desire in the bill, as Bridget said, to see us creating or looking at how we create more self-sufficiency and more ability for communities to look after themselves and less reliance on us to come and help them. We're not the army that's going to come over the hill anymore. But how we do that and how we create that engagement in a meaningful way and in a way that we can afford, I still don't know. There will be a rule, or there will be a standard, or there will be some guidance that will come out of the Minister or out of NEMA. But I wouldn't want to guess how long that's going to take. I know that their focus after the bill will be on a rewrite of the national plan. That's planned to take 2 years. I'm very conscious that we need to review and rewrite our CDM group plan, but the planning standard for that is probably years away. So we're going to be in a bit of a limbo around do we go ahead with rewriting it without much guidance and potentially not meet the needs, or do we try and ask for disconcession to not start yet? So there's a few things to work through.
And I think a note to that, from my point of view, is that in change coming our way, we need to understand that there's also change coming your way. And so how do we do that? And I've got another question, if you don't mind, Bridget. And part of, you talk about bespoke recovery. What in terms of better, me getting a better understanding in that, so does that recovery different between, say, Hicks Bay and Rangitata, for example?
James can jump in at any time here. What I meant by that is that the powers of the recovery manager don't extend. It's around the Councillor Sunkel can probably jump in as well, is that we've made comments around that the powers the recovery manager has are such a small part of what a recovery manager does, and for a short period of time. But that's not explicit in the bill about how that extends, and so how that actually is operation on the ground will determine what the situation is in Canterbury. So it's not clear that these are how we're going to do governance arrangements around recovery. That's what I meant by bespoke. Not that we've got something unique in Canterbury that may happen. There may be different from Hawke's Bay. It was just that it'll be made at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, James. Can I just quickly add to that? I think one of the key things is our recovery managers have transition powers, as Bridget said, and they last for a set amount of time, and it could actually be quite a few years. But there's no structures in place and no national way of viewing the likes of, we had Sarah in Christchurch, Hawke's Bay had the Cyclone Recovery Unit, and there's all been these ad hoc government processes put in place to manage the recovery. The new legislation doesn't put anything in place either at a national level, regional level or local level for that extended piece of recovery, which, costs multiple times more what the actual response dollars cost. And so we're still going to be ad hoc, we'll be doing it on the fly, and we'll be challenged on it.
It's a really good point. I remember talking to Minister Robinson when the Cyclone Gabrielle went in, and she said, it's just a bee's nest of ministers. It's just a bee's nest.
Bees nest. Kia ora. On that note, Stephanie?
I'll keep it short, but I did want to make a couple of operational observations in the context of simplifying local government and what you as councillors may need to consider. So one of the realities is that the Regional Council has a significant number of staff who are very well trained and have had extensive experience. So in emergency responses, many of our staff then go into emergency response. We backfill within our organization. The scale of future unitaries or otherwise for Waitaha Canterbury needs to be considered as to how that might deploy. That's an operational question. The second bit is about rates capping. So remembering that while this is a joint committee, the joint committee effectively recommends currently to the Canterbury Regional Council that in your LTP, you need to put X amount of dollars into your budget in order to pay for the shared service, if I can call it that, of civil defence delivery. With a rates cap, you will need to consider how that works, and any subsequent organisational arrangement will need to do similarly. Thirdly, in the context of RM reform, we have the Regional Spatial Plan, the question of infrastructure, and regional security for infrastructure, including flood management or other matters, needs to be in that regional spatial plan. Again, a key component of why, in my view, regional councils should be fundamental in regional spatial planning. And then lastly, due to the benefit of my professional development of going to the Nordic countries and to Singapore, I have seen what they call total defense in operation. This is connecting civil defense with national security defense and being able to have one-minded culture around the entire nation. If we want civil defense to be locally led, which is what we need in an emergency of 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, depending on the nature of the emergency, we need a culture of readiness within our communities. In order to do that, we need a culture of readiness as a nation. That is about total defense. And those Nordic countries and Singapore have done this in spades, and we could learn considerably from that. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
Kia ora, Stephanie. Thank you for that. Jesse, anything to finish off on?
I was just going to say, just drawing back to the conversation earlier around the LTP and the upcoming workshops, and Councillor Mackenzie mentioned the core services, and this is a core part of the community preparedness and response to hazards core service. So when we're starting to think about the LTP, let's start thinking about systems, processes, capability, capacity, resources, funding, etc., to address the concerns that have been raised today.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for your presentation. Bridget, James and Jesse, we finish up there. We're back at 12:45 with our wānanga with Claire and the Waimakariri room. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you.